Welcome to Nature Storytime. We'll be sharing 3 stories with you today. The story of the hummingbird. One day, a terrible fire broke out in a forest. A huge woodlands was suddenly engulfed by a raging wildfire. Frightened, all of the animals fled their homes and ran out of the forest. As they came to the edge of a stream, they stopped to watch the fire and they were feeling very discouraged and powerless. They were all bemoaning the destruction of their homes. Every one of them thought that there was nothing they could do about the fire except for one little hummingbird. This particular hummingbird decided it would do something. It swooped into the stream and picked up a few drops of water and went into the forest and put them on the fire. Then it went back to the stream and it did it again, and it kept going back again and again and again. All the other animals watched in disbelief. Some even tried to discourage the hummingbird with comments like, "Don't bother. It is too much. You are too little. Your wings will burn. Your beak is too tiny. It's only a drop. You can't put out this fire." And as the animals stood around disparaging the little bird's efforts, the bird noticed how hopeless and forlorn they looked. Then one of the animals shouted out and challenged the hummingbird in a mocking voice. "What do you think you're doing?" And the hummingbird, without wasting time or losing a beat, looked back and said, "I'm doing what I can." This is the whole story. Ash the tree had grown in the forest for all of their life, but there were lots of younger trees there now, and they made Ash feel very old indeed. "Nobody cares about an old tree like me," they said. "I'm no use to anyone anymore. I've got an old, knotty trunk, twisted branches, and I have an ache in my fork." He sighed. At the fork in his trunk, where 2 great branches met, rainwater had collected over the years. It soaked through the bark and made the wood soft and damp. But some things in the forest like old, damp wood. Fungus did, and it started to grow in Ash's old, aching fork. It sent little threads, like roots, down into the damp wood. "That tickles," said Ash. But as the fungus got bigger, the wood began to get softer and weaker. "Oh," said Ash, "I'm not sure I like this." It was hard to hold up the heavy branch. Then, one wild and rainy night, there was a loud crack, and the branch snapped right off. "Oh dear," said Ash. But at least the pain of holding up the heavy branch with soft old wood was gone. Now there was just a great scar of bare wood and the beginnings of a hole. The fungus kept growing, and as it grew, the wood became softer and started to rot. "No one is going to want to rot an old tree like me," sighed Ash. But the beetles did. Beetles like nice soft wood. "Over here," cried a beetle. "Is it soft? Is it damp?" asked another. It was. The crumbling, damp wood was the perfect place to lay their eggs. When the young beetle grubs hatched, they ate the dead, damp wood and made little tunnels as they burrowed through it. Some birds saw the damp wood too. They knew that that meant there were beetles there. Very soon, the birds were pecking at the wood to get to the lovely, juicy beetle grubs. "Oi," said Ash, "stop it." But as the beetle grubs tunneled and the birds pecked, the hole got bigger. The beetle grubs turned into adults and flew away. Ash was all alone again. Over the years, the rain fell. Beetles returned. Grubs tunneled and birds pecked. The hole grew bigger. Ash got quite used to having a hole. He was never quite sure what would happen next. One year, a female great robin spied the hollow. "That's almost right for a nest," she said. She chipped out a few bits of wood to make it a little bit bigger. There, perfect. She lined it with soft grass and moss and sheep's wool and animal hair. Then she laid 7 eggs. Ash was excited as a tree could be, waiting for the eggs to hatch. When they did, there were 7 cheeping chicks snuggled in the hole. But by the end of the summer, the chicks had grown up and were gone. The hole was empty again, and Ash was all alone once more. Summer turned to autumn, and the nights became colder. Ash felt a little fluttering deep inside. It was a wren, and it had found the hole. "Oh," said the wren, "I must tell the others." So it did. That night, 5 or 6 wrens all huddled together in the hole to keep warm. They kept each other dry throughout the cold, dark night, and they slept there every night for the whole winter. "Perhaps I'm not so old and useless after all," said Ash happily. It was true. An old tree with a hole was very important in the forest. Think of all the creatures that needed it and who he helped. This is the natural garden. There was once a king who had a great palace with wonderful gardens. In those gardens there lived thousands of creatures from hundreds of different species. There was a great variety in color, and they turned that place into a kind of paradise that everyone could enjoy. There was only one thing in those gardens that the king disliked. Near the center stood the remains of what had been, centuries ago, a huge tree, but that now was withered and dry, and detracted from the color and beauty of its surroundings. This bothered the king so much that he finally ordered it to be cut down and replaced by a beautiful series of fountains. Some time later, a wise noble was visiting the king at his palace. He whispered in the king's ear, "Majesty, you are the wisest of men. Everyone hears talk of the beauty of these gardens and the multitude of creatures that populate them. But during the time I've spent here, I've hardly seen anything other than this fountain and just a few small birds. What a deception!" The king, who had never tried to deceive anyone, found, to his horror, that what the noble had told him was true. They had spent so many months admiring the fountains that they hadn't realized that hardly any animals remained in the gardens. Without wasting time, he sent for the court's experts and advisors. The king had listened to many lies, inventions, and assumptions, but nothing could explain what had happened. Not even the great reward offered by the king himself managed to recuperate the royal garden's former splendor. Many years later, a young woman presented themselves to the king, assuring him that she could explain what had happened and how the animals could be returned. "What happened with your garden is that there just wasn't enough poo, your majesty, particularly moth poo." All those present laughed at the young woman's joke. The guards got ready to throw her out, but the king stopped them. "I want to hear what you have to say. From the 1,000 lies I've heard, none have begun like that." The young woman continued, very serious, and started explaining how the garden's big animals fed mainly on the little, brightly colored birds, who owed their appearance to their own food, composed of colorful worms, who in turn fed on various rare species of plants and flowers that could only be grown in this part of the world, just so long as there was enough moth poo for them. And so she continued, telling how the moths were the basis of much food for many things other than the birds, whose poo encouraged the appearance of new species of plants that fed other insects and animals, and which were, in turn, vital to the existence of other species. And the young woman would have kept speaking without pause if the king had not shouted, "Enough! And you can tell me how you know all these things, being so young?" asked the king. "Well, because now all from your garden are at my house. Before I was born, my father collected that old tree you had torn out from the middle of the garden, and he planted it in our garden. Since then, every spring, from out of that old tree comes thousands and thousands of moths. With time, the moths attract the birds, and new plants and trees grew, providing food for other animals that in turn provided food for others. And now, my father's old place is filled with life and color, all thanks to the moths from the big tree." "Excellent!" exclaimed the king. "Now I'll be able to recover my gardens, and I'll make you rich. Rest assured that within a week everything will be ready. Use as many men as you like." "Your majesty, I'm afraid I cannot be," said the young woman. "If you like, I can try to recreate the gardens, but you will not live to see it. It will take many years for the natural balance to reestablish itself. With great good fortune, perhaps, when I'm old, will see it completed. Things like these do not depend on how many men work on them." The face of the old king was sad and pensive, understanding how delicate was the balance of nature and how careless it had been to break it so happily. But he loved those gardens and those creatures, and he decided to build a huge palace next to the young woman's land. And with thousands of men working on the construction, he managed to see the palace finished in much less time than would have been necessary to reestablish the balance of nature of that garden in any other place. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed these stories. Are you feeling inspired? You can write a story about taking care of nature and share it with your friends, your family, and the rest of us here at Girl Scouts of New Mexico Trails by emailing it to customercare@nmgirlscouts.org.